This is where people usually go wrong. They spend their entire lives following a script written by someone else, trading the finite currency of their time for a paycheck that barely covers the cost of their survival, all while convinced that they are building security. The tragedy of the modern worker is not a lack of industry, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the game. Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad serves as a psychological and financial map, revealing the hidden fracture between the mind of the servant and the mind of the master. The story begins in the sun-drenched landscape of 1950s Hawaii, where a young protagonist finds himself caught between two titans of philosophy. On one side is his biological father, the poor dad, a man of immense academic prestige, a PhD holder, and a high-ranking government official who epitomized the archetype of the virtuous employee. He believed that the path to success was paved with good grades and a stable job. On the other side stood the rich dad, the father of his best friend, a high school dropout who possessed an intuitive, almost primal understanding of the flow of capital. The boy stood at a crossroads of destiny, forced to choose which voice would guide his hand. The narrative deepens as young Robert and his friend Mike attempt to make money by smelting lead toothpaste tubes into counterfeit nickels, a desperate, childhood attempt at alchemy. This failed venture leads them to the doorstep of the rich dad, who offers them a different kind of education. He puts them to work for 10 cents an hour, a wage so insulting it triggers the boy's anger. This was the first great lesson in the psychology of the paycheck. Rich Dad deliberately starved the boys of money to ignite their financial creativity. He taught them that the moment you accept a salary, you become a slave to a certain level of fear, the fear of not having enough. This fear, coupled with the greed for the things money can buy, creates the rat race. The analysis of this early stage reveals that most people do not work because they enjoy it, they work because they are terrified of the alternative. By removing the safety net of the wage, Rich Dad forced the boys to look for opportunities that others missed. They eventually created a comic book library in a basement, using discarded books to generate passive income. This was the archetype of the creator of value. A mind that does not ask for a job, but builds a system. The story then transitions into the most critical distinction in the history of personal finance, the difference between an asset and a liability. To the poor dad, his house was his greatest asset. To the rich dad, a house was a liability. This is the great deception that keeps the middle class in a state of perpetual struggle. Rich Dad defines an asset with a simplicity that defies traditional accounting. An asset is something that puts money into your pocket, whether you work or not. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. The narrative describes how the poor and middle class spend their lives collecting liabilities, cars, big houses, expensive clothes, under the mistaken belief that these symbols of wealth are wealth itself. This creates a cash flow nightmare. Every raise in salary is met with an equal or greater rise in expenses, keeping the individual tethered to the treadmill. The rich dad, however, focuses relentlessly on the asset column. He buys rental properties, stocks, and businesses. The analysis here is profound. Wealth is not measured in the currency of your income, but in the number of days you can survive if you stopped working today. It is the measure of your financial freedom, a state where your assets generate enough cash to cover your liabilities. As the continuous narrative flows, the script explores the concept of financial literacy as a form of intellectual sovereignty. The poor dad was a master of the language of words, but the rich dad was a master of the language of numbers. The story illustrates that without the ability to read a financial statement, you are a blind man in a forest of predators. You become a victim of the taxman, the banker, and the salesman. Rich Dad teaches the boys the 4 pillars of financial IQ: accounting, investing, understanding the markets, and the law. This is the armor of the master. While the poor dad viewed taxes as a duty for the common good, the rich dad viewed them as a cost to be managed. He used the magic of the corporation to protect his wealth. A corporation is not a building or a person, it is a legal document that allows the rich to earn money, spend it, and only then pay taxes on what remains. In contrast, employees are taxed first and must survive on the scraps. This segment of the narrative intensifies the sense of injustice. showing how the system is designed to reward the owner and penalize the worker. The narrative momentum builds as it addresses the archetype of the brave investor. Most people fail to become rich not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack the courage to act on what they know. The story describes the fear of losing as a paralyzing force that keeps talented people in mediocre jobs. Poor Dad lived his life according to the mantra of don't take risks. Rich Dad, however, believed that the greatest risk was not taking one. He encouraged the boys to learn to manage risk rather than avoid risk. This is the psychological transition from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. The analysis of this shift reveals that in the real world, it's not the smart who get ahead, but the bold. The narrative depicts the protagonist as a young man joining the Marines and learning to fly helicopters, not for the glory of war, but to develop the leadership and discipline required to lead a business. This represents the idea that you should work to learn, not to earn. Every job should be a stepping stone toward a greater skill set, rather than a destination for a paycheck. By the end of this first segment, the listener is left standing at the threshold of a new reality. The poor dad, for all his degrees and hard work, is shown as a man dying in debt, leaving behind only unpaid bills. The rich dad is shown as a man who has built an empire that will feed his family for generations. The psychological intensity of the script highlights that the difference between the two was not their starting point, but their mindset. The rich dad philosophy is a call to awaken from the employee dream and to realize that the rules of the world are written by those who understand the flow of money. The lesson is a sobering realization: if you do not learn to make money work for you, you will spend the rest of your life working for money. The journey is just beginning, and as the narrative continues, we will explore the 5 obstacles that prevent even the most educated people from achieving wealth and the 10 steps to awakening your internal financial genius. The narrative plunges deeper into the psychological abyss of the employee mindset, exploring the internal shadows that prevent even the most brilliant minds from crossing the threshold into wealth. This is the movement from theory into the grit of human nature. The story focuses on the 5 internal enemies that haunted the poor dad and continued to keep the masses in chains. The first and the most formidable is fear, not just any fear, but the visceral terror of losing money. Rich Dad observed that the difference between the rich and the poor is how they handle that fear. To the poor dad, a loss was a tragedy that proved he should never have tried. To the rich dad, a loss was an investment in his education. The narrative depicts the archetypal winner as someone who hates losing but is not afraid of it, while the loser is so afraid of losing that they never even play the game. As the continuous narrative flows, we encounter the second enemy, cynicism. The story describes the Chicken Littles of the world, the friends, family members, and internal voices that scream the sky is falling whenever a new opportunity arises. This is the archetype of the critic, who stands on the sidelines of life, mocking the doer. The poor dad was a victim of his own skepticism, often talking himself out of greatness because he looked for all the reasons why something wouldn't work. The rich dad, however, practiced analysis instead of criticism. He taught the boy that a cynic's eyes are closed, but a critic's eyes are open to the hidden opportunity. The analysis here reveals that cynicism is a defense mechanism for the lazy mind. It is far easier to say that's impossible than it is to do the work required to prove it possible. The third enemy is laziness, but not the laziness of the idle. The narrative introduces a more insidious form, the laziness of the busy person. This is the individual who stays at the office until 9 p.m., avoids their family, and fills every waking second with tasks to avoid the hard work of looking at their financial reality. This was the tragedy of the poor dad. He was too busy working for a paycheck to ever design a life of freedom. The script describes this as a form of self-sabotaging industry. The rich dad's cure for this was a healthy dose of greed, or more accurately, desire. He insisted that instead of saying "I can't afford it," one must ask, "How can I afford it?" This shift in language forces the brain to wake up and solve problems rather than shutting down in defeat. The journey continues into the fourth enemy, bad habits. The story highlights that our lives are a reflection of our habits more than our education. The poor dad had the habit of paying everyone else first, the landlord, the utility company, the taxman, and only saving what was left. which was usually nothing. The rich dad practiced the law of paying yourself first. This is a ritual of psychological pressure. By paying himself first, even when he was short on cash, he used the resulting pressure from creditors as a motivation to find new ways to earn. This is the archetype of the self-reliant master. The analysis suggests that wealth is a discipline of the will. It requires the fortitude to prioritize your own asset column over the demands of the consumerist machine. Finally, the narrative confronts the fifth enemy, arrogance. Rich Dad famously said, "What I know makes me money. What I don't know loses me money." Arrogance is the ego's attempt to hide ignorance. The poor dad often used his academic degrees as a shield, refusing to learn about money because he felt it was beneath a man of his intellect. This led to a financial blindness that cost him his future. The script portrays the individual standing before the altar of their own pride, realizing that they must become a student of the world if they wish to master it. This is the stage of the beginner's mind, where the seeker admits they know nothing so that they can finally be taught everything. The narrative momentum builds as we transition into the 10 steps to awakening your financial genius. The story follows the protagonist as he begins to apply these steps in the real world, moving beyond the classroom of his childhood. The first step is the power of purpose, finding a reason greater than yourself to endure struggle. Without a want and a don't want, the spirit remains weak. The protagonist's don't want was the life of his poor dad, his want was the freedom of his rich dad. This leads to the second step, choice. Every day, with every dollar, we make a choice to be rich, poor, or middle class. The narrative emphasizes that our spending habits are the true indicator of our destiny. The analysis of the remaining steps focuses on the power of association. Rich Dad advised the boys to choose their friends carefully, not to be elitist, but to be aware of the vibrational influence of those around them. If you hang out with people who talk about money as a struggle, you will struggle. If you hang out with people who talk about money as a tool, you will build. This is followed by the power of learning quickly. The ability to master a formula and then have the courage to discard it for a new one. In a rapidly changing world, the ability to unlearn is just as important as the ability to learn. The script describes the individual as a mental athlete, constantly training their mind to see the shifting patterns of the global market. As the second part of this continuous narrative concludes, the listener is standing in a state of psychological readiness. You have identified the enemies within and the steps to awaken the genius. You have seen the poor dad's noble poverty contrasted with the rich dad's calculated abundance. The transition is nearing completion. You are no longer a victim of the rat race by ignorance, if you stay in it now. It is by choice. The final part of the script will reveal the hidden power of giving and the ultimate realization that money is not a thing, but a reflection of your internal value. The narrative reaches its final, transcendent stage, moving beyond the mechanics of accounting and the struggle of the ego into the realm of the master of flow. This is where the seeker realizes that money is not a physical object to be hoarded, but a manifestation of energy that responds to the spirit of the giver. The story follows the protagonist as he reaches the pinnacle of the rich dad's teachings, the power of contribution. While the poor dad lived in a world of not enough, where every dollar given was a dollar lost, the rich dad lived in a world of infinite supply. He taught that the secret to wealth is to give what you want to receive. If you want money, you must give money. If you want sales, you must help someone else sell. This is the archetype of the abundant source. The analysis of this principle reveals the ultimate paradox of capital. The more you cling to it out of fear, the faster it slips away. The more you circulate it with purpose, the more it multiplies. The journey of rich dad poor dad culminates in the realization that money is an illusion, a mere idea that only has power because we believe in it. The narrative describes a world where the truly wealthy create money out of thin air through their creativity and their ability to solve problems for others. They do not work for money, they create value. And money is the shadow cast by that value. The script portrays the protagonist standing in the ruins of the old industrial age mindset, looking toward the information age with the eyes of a pioneer. He no longer sees a world of scarcity and competition, but a world of abundant opportunity waiting for those with the financial IQ to claim it. The lesson learned is that your mind is your greatest asset. If you train it well, It will create wealth beyond your wildest dreams, if you leave it untrained. It will create a life of toil and regret. The core message Robert Kiyosaki intends to convey is that financial freedom is a spiritual journey of self-mastery. It is the process of shedding the slave identity of the employee and donning the sovereign identity of the owner. The book is not merely a guide to real estate or stocks, it is a manifesto for the deprogramming of the human soul. It asserts that the greatest cage is the one we cannot see, the cage of our own limiting beliefs about what is possible. By distinguishing between assets and liabilities, by mastering the 4 pillars of financial intelligence, and by overcoming the 5 internal enemies, you don't just get rich, you become a person who is capable of creating a world of freedom for yourself and those around you. In the final reckoning, the story of the 2 fathers serves as a mirror for all of humanity. We all have a poor dad within us, the part that craves security, fears loss, and seeks the approval of the system. And we all have a rich dad within us, the part that craves freedom, embraces risk, and seeks to master the laws of the universe. The choice is made every day, with every thought, and with every dollar. The narrative ends with the protagonist finally stepping out of the rat race forever. Not because he found a get-rich-quick scheme, but because he transformed his mind into a wealth-generating machine. He is free, not because he has money, but because he no longer fears the lack of it. The meaning of wealth is the ability to live life on your own terms, powered by the assets you have the courage to build.